Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Good afternoon if you are in Gaza or in Palestine. I am very glad to be hosting, along with Noura Erakat, this really important conversation with Nerdeen Kiswani, Daniel C., and another WOL member on flooding New York for Palestine, surveillance, brutality, and censorship of within our lifetime. My name is Bassam Haddad again. This is Noura Erakat, my co-host. I will not be introducing us as or in terms of the bios, but I will be introducing the others who are with us in just a moment. Let me just say that this is part of the Gaza and Context Collaborative project, which has produced a number of teach-ins, events and conversations, podcasts like this one. Everything can be found on palestineincontext.org. You'll also find a list of solidarity statements, as well as the War in Palestine podcast, as well as the Gaza in Context documentary. And a number of other things are coming up, including a teaching module and a resource module, both for the classroom and for basically laypersons. We are very happy to be joined by what we can call the brave, who have been doing almost the impossible in New York. I will let them tell their story, but first, let me just introduce Nerdeen, who will be our speaker. We will then move to a few questions, and the other wall members and Daniel C. will be engaging with us. And let's get started. How about if I get Noura to
Right. I
say
wanted
hi?
to just say a few things. Hi, good morning, everyone, and really salute to Within Our Lifetime, which has been mobilizing the streets of New York, has been channeling the energy of anger, frustration, and helplessness into a sense of agency and self-representation. You have mobilized the streets and voted with your feet in a way that has threatened authorities very visibly, most recently in banning you and your social media presence, though that is not deterring you. So I want to just salute you to the organizers who have taken this on, borne a brunt that we can't even see visibly, and say welcome. Welcome, Nerdeen. Welcome, Daniel. And I guess I'll read your... Nerdeen Kiswani is a Palestinian organizer from New York City. She is the founder and chair of Within Our Lifetime, United for Palestine, a community organization revitalizing the revolutionary spirit of Palestinians in exile in pursuit of liberation. Nerdeen has spoken for the Palestinian cause at events and conferences globally and has organized rallies with tens of thousands of attendees in support of Palestine. She graduated from the CUNY School of Law and has organized successful campaigns on and off campus to pass a resolution by the student government and faculty of CUNY Law to cut all ties and divest from all Israeli institutions that service the occupation. Folks might also remember that Nerdeen delivered the commencement speech at the time of her graduation, meeting that level of excellence on all grounds. So thank you, Nerdeen. The resolution that was passed at CUNY also defends the rights of Palestinians to resist colonization and calls to protect Palestinian speech. In 2021, Nerdeen led a campaign that successfully defeated a proposal to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which equates anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish bigotry with anti-Zionism, a long-standing project of Zionist and conservative movements in order to clamp down on critique in the United States and across Europe. While her organizing led to Zionist organizations orchestrating character assassination campaigns against her, demanding that she be expelled, in the summer of 2021, CUNY Law issued a statement defending Palestinian activism and denouncing anti-Palestinian hate. Not only was it the first statement of its kind from a U.S. law school, contrary to the Zionist demands to discipline Nerdeen, she was chosen to be the commencement speaker at the 2022 CUNY Law graduation. A note to self, not to ad-lib. But also, let's just add what's not here, which is that the CUNY Law faculty unanimously endorsed and support this resolution as well. So this is not just a testament to getting by and mobilizing through just narrow margins, but literally overwhelming margins of changing the culture on campus, where the opposition becomes from the top down because the street and the masses have been brought in and consolidated into power. Daniel C.
Yeah, we were going to Let's actually do this now because the other member will not have a bio. So let's introduce him. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, sorry, other member, but to Daniel C., who's with us, welcome. Longtime organizer of Within Our Lifetime, a graduate also of the CUNY system, which has been holding it down. Thank you. He's currently working as an attorney defending tenants from evictions in Queens County. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome, Nerdeen.
Welcome, everyone. This is, let me make sure this is not in the way. So we are going to start with asking Nerdeen to present for or talk for a few minutes, and then we will just have a conversation. We have some questions, and I'm sure others do as well. We will try to be as efficient as possible to take some questions, but we cannot promise that we will be able to take a lot of questions. Nerdeen, the floor is yours.
First of all, I just want to say Allah ya'atikum al-afiyah. Thank you so much, Noura and Bassam, for having us, and the whole team at Jadaliya and all the work that you've been doing for our people as well. And it's all coming together. It's what the movement has contributed, what y'all have contributed, that have made things like what happened at CUNY Law possible, and that are bringing people out to the streets. And Dan's really humble with his bio as well, because he's pretty much been there. Basically, my bio almost applies to him also, because he's pretty much been there every step of the way as well. As we all know, for over 130 days, our people in Palestine have been enduring and resisting a ruthless genocide perpetrated by the Zionist state. And the people in Gaza in particular have lived horrors that no one should live. While we live stream this death and destruction on our phone screens, doing whatever we can not to fall into despair and feel helpless. For many of us, including myself, that means demonstrating, marching, rallying in the streets to contradict the mainstream media narrative on Palestine and our so-called leaders who continue to perpetuate this genocide and attempt to manufacture consent for it. Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank and 48 also continue to be killed, oppressed, jailed, while the U.S. and Israel continue to overshadow this genocide with their political and ideological apparatuses working overtime. It's more imperative than ever that we mobilize in defense of Palestinian freedom, something that's taking place in every corner of the world right now. And for years, WOL has been working to grow the movement for Palestinian liberation here in New York City. In the wake of this ongoing genocide, we've mobilized hundreds of thousands to flood the city for Gaza, taking over major roads, transportation hubs, bridges, while bringing our numbers to the doors of political offices, consulates, and corporations supporting the genocide of the Palestinian people. In light of this mobilization, we've been facing a heightened landscape of severe political repression that we're seeing, being echoed across the US and the world right now. The NYPD, alongside the city, state, and federal governments, and even social media platforms like you mentioned, Meta, have grown desperate to try to stop us from taking to the streets and fighting for our people's liberation. They've enhanced the use of surveillance technology, the same technology that the Zionist occupation uses to police our marches. They engage in aggressive and illegal tactics to attempt to scare us into backing down and quelling our numbers. They've regularly attacked protesters, including minors, and they continuously monitor and censor our individual speech and social media activity. There has been an increase in repression on all fronts, from the NYPD to the universities, to Instagram deleting not just our account and our backup account, including my own two personal accounts, my main account and my backup, and that goes to show that it's not just a ban of certain accounts because there's been too many violations, but as us as an organization and me as an individual, because on our backups we don't even post to get violations. So we're hearing from behind the scenes that just by knowing it's us, they'll delete it. And Meta has also commented on this publicly, confirming that it's deleted and it doesn't have to do with their new policy changes. We've also seen them delete Instagram accounts like orgs like Decolonize This Place, and many other accounts that continue, to disappear. There has been an increase in repression in the university. We know that one of our members, Abdullah Aqil, was possibly facing suspension from Harvard. And there's a whole campaign that we posted about this. Our Instagram was deleted an hour after we posted this. We Stand with Abdullah, which got thousands of people to email Harvard to let them know, the claims that Zionist organizations were making, that some of his statements were so-called anti-Semitic. These are actually long-standing sayings in the Arab world, like, teach your kids that Israel is an enemy. Teach your kids that Palestine will be free. This is a common saying that we have in Arabic, and all he did was translate it. Suddenly, Zionist orgs are doxing him, putting him on the side of trucks that are driving by Harvard, and pressuring the administration to punish him, which essentially would amount to punishing the entire Arab world, essentially just by being Arab, just by being Palestinian in these spaces. If you're not a traitor to your own people, they're coming for you and they're calling you anti-Semitic right now. So, in fact, the day after we released this report, both Dan and I were arrested at an action. So, all of these things ramping up at once are just showing the different ways that empire is growing desperate to stop us, that, if protests, if marching, if rallying didn't really work, why on every level, from the university to the streets, the police, social media, why are they clamping down? And this was the first time both Dan and I have been arrested in over 10 years of organizing protests at one of our own protests. This has never, happened before. So since then, and all of our latest actions, we have updated this repression report that we have, put out to document all of the police violence, all of the different manifestations of repression that we've been facing. And you can, read this on our website at wolpalestine.com/resist-repression. The latest version is on there now, and will continue to be a central hub for documenting city and state repression, brutality, and abuse against our organization and community. Our goal is simple. We want to flood New York for Palestine, to demand an end to U.S. military aid to the Zionist entity, and to provide a space for our people here and all our supporters to build community and organization through mass street demonstrations until every inch of Palestine is liberated. We've heard the latest NYPD commissioner, who has enhanced this use of violence against us, say fascistic things like, putting a sticker on a car is symbolic of lawlessness and disorder, and we'll do whatever it takes, using the highest power, this is a paraphrasing, but like the highest power that they have in the law to be able to prosecute, or just take to the furthest extent what they can, people placing stickers on cars that he admits are easily removable. We have seen him do whatever it takes to get into the good graces of Zionist organizations and Zionist politicians. And one thing he often says is, hardworking taxpayers shouldn't have to deal with these protests, which, when we're marching in the streets, we see MTA workers, sanitation workers, FDNY and ambulance EMT workers honk in support of us, turn on their sirens in support of us, show us with their fists, with their clapping in every way they can that they support us. We're hardworking, tax-paying people too, and we don't want our taxes being sent to kill our people in Palestine, which I think, at this point, most young people, if not most Americans, agree with. It's a very common sense demand. This is what, we're taking to the streets to do. And if hardworking taxpayers are angry at protests blocking them, which, isn't us often causing that traffic and that blockage, it's the police itself, because, we're marching most of the time. If they're mad at that, they can take it up with their political leaders that continue to fund genocide, that we're all watching here, that we have to do whatever it takes to stop. And we don't aim to put anyone in danger. We have security protocols. We carefully plan our actions to avoid needless confrontation with law enforcement. But as we've seen over the last 4 months, the police have met not just our protests, but anyone mobilizing for Palestine right now with physical violence, with baseless prosecutions, and intense and unprecedented surveillance. We know that Palestine is in the crosshairs of the police state today, and the imperialist agenda aims to suppress all people's liberation struggles. Like we've seen from Standing Rock and Stop Cop City, these forces can and will be used to crush anyone standing in the way of US colonial and imperial expansion. Like Joe Biden said, if there wasn't an Israel, they would have to create one. So this is part and parcel of that agenda. And in the midst of our fight to resist genocide in Palestine, we've seen a new wave of government surveillance, harassment, and prosecution target our community, particularly the Muslim and Arab community in New York that is still reeling from post 9/11 policies that have been exposed, that have come out to be racist, that now they're using Palestine as a pretext to creep up on us once again. And part of our duty in fighting for the liberation of Palestine means to fight against the state repression that is being mobilized against our community and other communities throughout New York. We hope that this report and conversations like the one that we're having today catalyzes a renewed drive for support, research, creative legal interventions, and dedication of resources towards that end. And again, thank you both so much for covering this, for having this, and I'm excited to talk to you more about this report.
Thanks, Nerdeen. Before I ask any questions, Daniel, would you like to interject at this point?
Yeah, I'll just jump on to say thank you to Noura and Bassam for organizing this, and thank you to everyone who's watching at home. I think Nerdeen, covered the general landscape that we find ourselves in New York City, because everyone we all know that this is a historic moment in world history that's going to determine the trajectory of not just Palestinian history, not just the history of the Middle East, but really the world as it moves forward. And when it comes to repression, and surveillance and censorship, we are also in a particular moment, both here in New York City and in around the world. We see the Merrimack 3 in New Hampshire, who are facing draconian charges, trumped-up charges, for organizing against Elbit Systems, the Israeli weapons manufacturer. We see Germany basically outright banning Palestinian political expression. We see England banning face masks and literally hunting people down in the street for the crime of wearing a T-shirt that had a paraglider on it. So we see these kind of different forms and these different representations of political repression in different countries, in different mediums, and we have our own experience of that in New York City in different manifestations, and that similar dynamic of police violently repressing protests is playing out all around the country. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm excited to build with everyone around the country who and world who's listening to this, and to see how we can share experiences, share how to fight back against this repression, both in the streets, both in the legal sphere, in the cultural sphere, in the journalistic sphere, because I think we all have a role to play, not only fighting for Palestine, but responding and defending primarily the Muslim and Arab and Palestinian communities who are facing the brunt of this surveillance, criminalization, and repression in the moment that we find ourselves in. So, yeah, I'm excited to get into the conversation, but I'll pass it back to y'all.
Before, I'm gonna let Noura lead in with the questions, but before we do that, the third guest, the WOL member, let's call them John Doe. Would you like to share any comments before we start the conversation?
John Doe.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for hosting us and for having this conversation. I'm really excited to see what kind of fruit it bears. And yeah, I just want to underscore that, what we're facing here in the streets, from police, from universities, from social media, as much as it is about repression against the Palestine movement, it also is catalyzing this, future or looming or already present in a lot of ways police state that we're finding ourselves in. The drones that they're flying over every single one of our protests, it's not just to surveil us and to keep eyes on us, but also to make sure that they know who is active in the movement and who is speaking out and who is demonstrating. And it's the exact same technology and the exact same logic that is used, in the occupation of the West Bank, where these are the exact same drones, and this is the same technology that is being used for Israeli surveillance. And I think that, and like it's explicitly something that Eric Adams, drew inspiration from on a trip to occupied Palestine, where he started developing this kind of technology. And we also see this, in the repression of Stop Cop City in Atlanta, where
Right.
these efforts, which are all deeply in solidarity with Palestine, but are also as a result of that, confronting the state and empire, and even in only our mass street demonstrations, threatening the rule of empire. I think that it's building up towards the kind of repression that we should be confronting now, and something that I think that as a movement will make us stronger to stand against united.
Thank you, John Doe and Daniel Nerdeen. I actually wanted to lift up from that. That was the impression that I'm getting. The work, one of the things that your work in particular illuminates very vividly for us are the intersections of the transnational solidarity that unites us, and specifically the ways in which law enforcement and military forces are actually entwined in a form of state violence, often without distinction. We see that in the mobilization, for example, of the National Guard against protesters in Ferguson, Missouri, as well as in, the Army Corps against protesters at Standing Rock, in a way that connects technologies, carceral and military, from G4S being used in Israeli occupation prisons to, the global war on terror, but in Guantanamo Bay and in the UK and beyond. And your work really illuminates how state violence is being mobilized and expanded. The authority for it is being expanded in the name of, protecting Israel. But in fact, that just becomes a liberal veneer in order to expand state violence against everyone. This is a threat. This is a threat to everybody. And I think one of the things people often miss is that Palestine and Palestinians are maybe the lowest hanging fruit because of the way that racism against Palestinians and the disposability of their bodies has become normalized, which we're obviously fighting against fervently, but that sacrificing us doesn't protect anybody. And so just to just offering that lens, I think that that's what your latest report is doing for us as well, which if we can pull it on the screen, thank you for this labor. I mean, it's not just the labor, it's not in addition to the tremendous labor of mobilizing people, empowering them, getting them into the streets to take over tunnels, as we saw just last week, right? You're also doing this research of documenting and following what is, right? What is the city state? What are state forces doing in order to clamp down on protected speech in the name of protecting property, in the name of protecting, right, the elite? And so if you can tell us, just start us off here with this report, what leads to it, maybe any kind of methods you want to share with it, and major takeaways, and then we can get into some of its content and lessons learned.
I think I can just start us off real quick because I also misspoke in the intro. I called Kaz Daughtry the commissioner of the NYPD. He's actually the assistant commissioner, but it might have been like a little bit of a Freudian slip because people say, from both the left and the right, that the actual commissioner is just kind of like a figurehead, and Kaz Daughtry is pretty much, even though he's the assistant commissioner, he's pretty much what's regarded as the commissioner. And, he's been on trips to the Zionist entity, along with Eric Adams, along with the NYPD, as we know that police forces, train with Israel. We know that they get their surveillance technology. There have been NYPD officials that have publicly stated that they get hourly updates from Israel. They have an office in Tel Aviv. And so, we've always known this. And for some reason, talking about it is treated, and Canary Mission just made this like meme video about me. It's treated like this is a conspiracy, theory. It's like, oh, like shadowy Israel is like really the shadow, police here in New York. And actually, these connections are very public. They're very explicit. And they're explicit to us on the streets when we see these drones, when police officers, straight up arrest people and then tell us when they haven't been doing anything. And then they tell us, well, we saw them doing something on the drone like 30 minutes ago or an hour ago, and we're arresting them later. And we're seeing kind of like this relationship to Israel and this prioritization of Zionist organizations be used to brutalize us, to arrest us in the streets for the explicit purpose of undermining, of ending our protests. When Dan and I were arrested, there was no charges ever like filed into the system. When we went to court, basically the case didn't exist. So what purpose was it for other than to create or attempt to create chaos and panic and try to end the action that we were having that day, which was in front of AIPAC and calling out elected officials. But, that didn't work, and we continued to mobilize. So these are things that anybody who's been in the Palestinian Arab Muslim community has grown up knowing our whole lives. These are experiences that we've had every day, and we just haven't seen it really compiled or discussed in this way. And we felt it was important for us to document this as people who have been part of these changes, who've seen these escalations in repression and violence over so many years, particularly since October. They say there's some days where, years pass by, and that's what this has been. We've mobilized more for Gaza in the last 4 months than we probably have in some years combined. And, it was just important for us to create this. I don't know if Dan and John Doe want to add to this.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the intention of releasing the report is, in large part for archival purposes, because, when incidents like police brutality happen, or even little data points, of, oh, this commissioner said this about their trip to Israel or whatever, it becomes very hard for collectively for us to kind of ingrain those moments in our memories and move forward knowing these different data points and remember these different incidents of police violence and repression. Only if you sue them will that stuff come back out later. So the archival value of it, I think, is very important, not just for our own sake, but everyone who's organizing for Palestine in this moment. We want to inspire people to make similar kinds of reports. Not in the same way that we do it. Like, people have their own methods, and that's amazing, and we can learn from each other on that. But the value of archiving this information, of learning these experiences that we're collectively learning across the country, is immense value. There's, we learn from our experience. We learn about how to organize a protest and get around the police by our experience doing it. And we're not, our memories are only so good. So I think a lot of the intention also in our releasing the report was, to inspire others to not just keep good records of what goes on at protests, but, go the next step in exposing this kind of repression, write pieces, have journalists write pieces in about NYPD repression, or about, for instance, the fact that the NYPD's emergency call system uses software made by Nice Systems, which was founded by IDF soldiers and former Israeli intelligence. These kind of small data points about the connections between the NYPD, the connections between the city of New York and the Zionist entity. These are all things that we want to inspire people to expand our collective knowledge about. Write FOILs, freedom of information law requests, write them on the NYPD office in Tel Aviv, write them on all these different incidents of what we want to do, because there's so much work to do, and we're only so many people, collectively. So I really encourage people to read it, and take inspiration from it to deepen your work, deepen your on the ground work, and then your research work. If you're an artist, if you're a journalist, if you're a lawyer, we need. I can't tell you how many lawyers we need, civil rights attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, people who are willing to go the next step in creative legal strategies and interventions, for us to build our movement, build this movement stronger than before, and to prevent, not just the NYPD, not just federal law enforcement, but social media companies and the whole rest of the repressive forces that are arrayed against us, and stop them from doing what they want, which is to shut us up, take away our microphone. It's pretty symbolic, I think, that they ban our platform, which has been the biggest platform we've had in our 9-year history, and then around the same time they arrest us for using microphones. They enforce this kind of no sound policy. It's almost poetic, because it's really like, you will not have a voice. We're going to take away your platform. We're going to take away your very voice, ability to transmit sound, audio, so people can hear your message. But what's inspiring at the same time is that people are rejecting that logic, and we're still getting people out into the streets. We're still making our way, to make ourselves heard, no matter if we have a microphone or if we don't have a microphone.
Our WOL member, John Doe, would you like to share any comments before we move to the next question?
Yeah, I would just also like to add that this report was, done completely on a volunteer basis. None of us are really like compensated for this. And this was like truly a labor of love, and, a labor of our commitment to not only this movement, but to all, people's movements in the US and beyond. And aside, alongside the archival purpose and intentions behind it, I really think it's also valuable for us to, have this thing right now in the present moment, so that we can keep tightly coordinated, keep up to date. There was, in a recent presentation, the head of counterterrorism at the NYPD, Rebecca Weiner, said that New York City, and specifically the South Manhattan office of the NYPD, is getting hourly updates from their point person in Tel Aviv. Hourly updates every hour since October 7th. And the moment that we face this escalation and repression, on the streets by the NYPD, on social media, when our Instagram was taken down, in our universities, when our most visible members started to become targeted, it's also at the time when there was a genocidal escalation in Israel's campaign in Gaza. When they began bombing Rafah, when they announced these plans for a ground invasion. And they are working, and they're very tightly coordinated. And I think that the more coordinated that our movement can become, the more knowledgeable every single person participating in it, whether you're an organizer or a protester or just somebody joining along, the more aware you are of what's going on and the repression that we're facing and the ways that we are working to fight against it, I think the stronger that our movement is going to become.
Thank you all. Let me just ask you also something about the chronology since October 7th, in the sense of whether there's been a change, or whether it's been consistent in the manner the NYPD and the city government have engaged with protesters, Arab, Muslim, Palestinian communities, and how those of you're probably all too young, but how would you compare this from what you know to the experience in the post 9/11 attacks? And do you hear or see or know about changes specifically in New York in that sense?
Yeah, and I'll just say for the first question on chronology that, there are different, captains, different precincts, different patrol borough commands of the NYPD. And, we've interacted with all the patrol borough commands. They have their different styles. So, the response is not 100%, consistent. There has been brutality from the start. One of the worst experiences of brutality that's well documented in this report, one of the first ones that we experienced happened in our own neighborhood in Bay Ridge, which is called Little Palestine, in Brooklyn. It's a primarily Palestinian, Arab, Muslim community, and there have been protests going on all over the city. But that level of violence and brutality, where you see them dragging 12-year-olds, where you see them like punching, throwing Hail Marys into crowds, you really first saw that emerge in our community, and that's no surprise. Given the disdain that, a lot of these police officers still have towards our people. I mean, these are the same officers who were spying on us. They're not different cops. There's the same cops, and they're using the same playbook. In that protest, particularly like in Bay Ridge, at many protests, we stop for Salah. When it's Salah time, people want to stop and people want to pray. And so, usually we don't have an issue doing that all throughout the city. But especially back in October and, back in 2023, where there was still more of like kind of a measured police response, which is just, hard to say because it's like measured violence, but it's still violence. But at that one, the captain actually refused to move from in front of the Salah, when we always explain to him, media, people who attend, that it's disrespectful to just stand in front of people while they pray and move to the side. Most of the time people respect it. And there's a photo of him in the report, just like standing over everyone, looking at them in disdain. And, this is the experience that we've had with police post 9/11. This is the experience that, MSAs and Muslim and Arab organizations, a lot of times, they would say, let's not talk about politics, or let's not talk about Palestine. People might be listening. We could get in trouble, for this. This was like kind of like how we grew up in New York. I saw, I saw, like, I was in second grade when it happened, and I saw the paper flying from the buildings from my Islamic school. I went to Al Noor school, and I remember, how the whole atmosphere changed after that, how Muslim women started taking off, their hijab, how a lot of Palestinians that I knew growing up stopped saying that they were even Palestinian. They started saying that they were, Jordanian or Lebanese or wherever, their refugee camp ended up. I knew Usamas who changed their name to Adam and names and things like that. So the difference we see this time is that, they wanted this to be Israel's 9/11. And even when I went on Piers Morgan, like, they interrogated me about whether I condemned 9/11, trying to claim that this is Israel's 9/11, trying to recreate that moment once again. But the difference is, this time our community is not going to be bullied into silence. We're not going to be afraid. We're not going to be told that we can't stand against the genocide happening against our people. And more is coming out that undermines the idea that this is so-called Israel's 9/11. We see that, for many of the claims made, they have been unraveling. The 40 beheaded claims has become laughable, which the president literally participated in. And Palestine is just taking, laying bare the truth for everyone to see. It's making the world go mask off. And, it's more important now than ever to show people this truth. And all of this repression is an attempt to stop it, because we know the more people learn about Palestine, the more they support and join the struggle. And so, I'm glad that our community feels more empowered this time, especially, my parents, they didn't grow up here. For many of us coming from immigrant backgrounds, our families didn't feel well equipped to fight against the oppression that they were facing in a post 9/11 moment in the same way that we do now, growing up in these schools, in these communities with our neighbors and people who, we know, understanding that, these are all racist tropes that are used against us. And, we've grown past that at this point.
Yeah.
I want to, really lift up an analysis that became, I think, very clear at the height of Black uprising, right? Which is this overlap. You're saying, Nerdeen, you told us earlier, like Canary Mission, ADL are all upset about us illuminating the relationship between Israel and U.S. police, a relationship that actually begins to take shape in the early 1990s, that becomes formalized in the aftermath of September 11th in 2001, where DHS formalizes these relationships. NYPD has an office in Tel Aviv, but also we've got, police forces across the country, right? I want to say almost 2 to 3 dozen, right? And that's not even counting the numbers. That's just police forces that have gone across the country to train in Israel. Why are law enforcement training in Israel? And they formalize this under, a law enforcement training to combat terrorism, to align the distinctions between these two contexts in order to, basically collapse who is considered an enemy even within, and these are often in the United States, racialized minorities, so much so that this is what gives rise to the campaigns that have ended such police trainings, like in Durham, the only successful city council that abolished its police officer training in Israel. So to even come back and say any of that is anti-Semitic is basically to belie the policy of these organizations, which have tried to basically say that your safety is in police, that your safety is in greater state power, that your safety is in walls and garrison states, as opposed to what you're preaching to us and showing us, that our safety is in solidarity. I want to read a poem by Saul Williams, since Daniel, you're saying this is much like poetry. So in that spirit, Saul Williams writes, Israel is like if police got their own country, uniform impunity, and everybody ugly. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about what distinguishes NYPD from other police across the country, that makes, one, that illuminates for us what's at the task, but also the challenges you face and how you're meeting them?
And Daniel and John Doe, please feel free to also interject. Let's have this as more of an informal conversation. Jump in when you feel like it.
Absolutely. So, I think the NYPD, while it shares a lot of similarities with a lot of police departments across the world, particularly, the LAPD, the PD in Washington, D.C., I think they are very distinct as a police force. The NYPD is one of the only ones, if not the only, I don't know of actually any other one that does. I think maybe Washington, D.C., that has offices not just in Tel Aviv. They have offices in like 18 different countries. They just opened up two new ones, like 2 weeks ago in Tucson, Arizona, and Bogota, Colombia. So this is they're a police force that basically has an intelligence agency attached to it, the intelligence division, and at times, especially after 9/11, their intelligence agency was actively competing with federal agencies for resources, for power and influence. They were actually competing with one another because the NYPD at that time was so strong and had so much power that they were able to, boss around the FBI in certain contexts. And that, while that's changed in the past couple of years since 9/11, in a lot of ways it hasn't. And Noura, you spoke about the expanding police capabilities a few minutes ago, and it's interesting because I was reading about the police response when cities have like RNCs or DNCs, the Democratic National Convention, because they're always expecting protests. And the history is once police forces are preparing for these kind of conventions, they drastically expand their capabilities. They buy armored vehicles, they buy all sorts of things, right, in the lead up to these things, but then they never get rid of it, right? So then it becomes the floor that's constantly going up. And that's, I think, what we see in New York City in a lot of ways, especially in regards to its surveillance technology, that they're really rolling out right now in this moment against Palestinians and against Muslims and Arabs in New York City. First and foremost, that's who it's targeting. But we spoke a lot already at length about the office in Tel Aviv. It's in a settlement called Kfar Saba, which is a Zionist settlement that was built on the ruins of a Palestinian village that was ethnically cleansed in 1948. The first liaison was a guy named Mordecai Dzikansky. He was a detective with the NYPD, and his role and the current role of the liaison there is to gather intelligence and relay information to the NYPD in order to enhance the NYPD's ability to recognize, react to, prevent, or recover from terrorist attacks, and work with senior members of the Israeli intelligence community on joint investigations which connected New York City and the state of Israel. So, I mean, that sentence should give all of us who are working for Palestine like extreme pause, because what does that mean? What kind of investigations are they working on? We already know that the Israeli intelligence agencies have had a very big role in things like Canary Mission, things like Israel on campus, certain elements of the Zionist campus movement. I don't want to call it movement, but apparatus. So we already know that the Israeli intelligence agencies are very already connected with what goes on in the United States. So the fact that the NYPD is working with them on quote unquote joint investigations, I mean, we already know what that road leads down to. Years ago they accused a bunch of Palestinians of smuggling cigarettes and raising money for Hamas a couple maybe a decade ago. And I'm sure the intelligence division had a role in creating that narrative. Now I see right-wing politicians writing letters to the New York Post claiming that smoke shops are funding the resistance movement in Yemen. So I think we have to be very cautious about what the media narrative is going on, because there's a lot of ways that they're manufacturing consent for expanded police powers, for expanded war, for the genocide in general. But to go back to that office, the current detective who's embedded with the Israeli National Police is Charles Ben Naim, who's a detective with the NYPD. And John Doe, our third member, said at the beginning of this that the NYPD recently said that they've been giving hourly updates from occupied Palestine straight to One Police Plaza. Hourly updates, and they've spoken a lot about the protest movement in New York City since then. So I'm sure these updates are reciprocal, So, I think we have to be very understanding of what that means and how that is going to change the landscape for us moving forward, because the relationship is so strong that on the October 7th itself, guess where the NYPD top brass was? They were in occupied Palestine. There's a lot of reporting about this. They were there receiving training on counterterrorism and anti-Semitism. Right? This is the NYPD getting trainings on anti-Semitism by the Israeli army. And, I think that kind of speaks for itself, right? Because the particular police forces that are repressing us at protests, the most famous one is called the Strategic Response Group. And there's been a lot of reporting about this unit in particular, but they were actually started for counterterrorism purposes. They were never supposed to police protests. But, after they were founded, especially during the George Floyd uprising, the movement for Black Lives in general, the SRG became the protest goon squad, basically. So they were started for counterterrorism purposes, but now they're the protest and their squad. And their task is literally to perceive us as enemy combatants. This is in their documents. This is in their training materials. So the fact that the NYPD is going to occupied Palestine to get trainings on counterterrorism and trainings on quote unquote anti-Semitism, I think that speaks for itself, because New York State embraces the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which means that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And I'm sure that translates to the police force, And then the last thing I'll say on this point, because I know I've been speaking at length, is the drone usage. I think that is differentiating the NYPD from other departments. Is if you've been to a protest on October 7th, you've seen the drones hovering above your head. It's now ubiquitous. Every protest you can go to, you'll see a drone. And that came also from occupied Palestine, the occupation itself. Mayor Adams, Kaz Daughtry, other NYPD brass went to occupied Palestine in 2023, and I think before that as well, to basically shop around for drones, because they liked how they were using it to, Adams said, quote unquote, the method in which the IDF is using them, the methods in which they are training to use them, is what caught my interest. And where are they using it now? Right, they're using it against protests. They use it against surveilling Black people having barbecues in Brooklyn. This is what they've said that they used it for. So all of this speaks for itself. I think our task now is just to gather this information, condense it, and disseminate it, right, to make sure that we're all aware of what's going on, which is what the report is trying to achieve.
John Doe, would you like to add before I would like to move to address the report specifically with some of its content, but would you like to share anything as well as Nerdeen, of course?
Yeah, very quickly. On the point that Noura, you raised on kind of this logic of safety, I really want to underscore the fact that the police are absolutely not keeping us safe at these protests, and they are actively putting us in danger. Their logic and their argument, especially when they start making threats of arrest and stuff. It's always about, we want to keep the protests safe, we want to keep pedestrians safe. And that's especially been the case since January 26th, the day after we first published this initial version of the report, and the day that both Nerdeen and Dan were arrested. The logic was about public safety, about, how it's not safe that we're taking over the street. And particularly, the logic was rooted in this fact that we didn't have permits to protest. And the thing is, we've never had permits for any protest that we've had in, nearly a decade of organizing. And it's never been an issue. But it seems like this is now the new kind of the new logic that they use to claim that we are not being safe and that we are not adhering to NYPD law and to New York City, regulation, whatever that is. And so if we're using sound equipment, they arrest us. And if we take over the streets, they arrest us. It's also worth noting that there actually is no such thing as a moving sound permit in New York City. So even if we had gotten permits, we couldn't actually, lead chants on a mic while marching in the street. But so they make this argument that it's about our safety. At the same time, however, they actively go against whatever directives of safety actually exist, even within their own law. If there is a mass of people staging a protest, it is actively safer for those protesters, who number often in our protests in the thousands, to actually get onto the streets, because the sidewalk becomes a very cramped and dangerous location. They don't care about that. They actively push us onto the sidewalk. And it's not even about the convenience of, passing by pedestrians, because in order to keep us on the sidewalk, the NYPD actively often occupies the roadway themselves. So it's not like cars are getting through. And it's much more about a show of force of policing our movement and policing our freedom of expression and our freedom of, literally moving and literally being able to take up public space in the city that we live in. And at the same time, we've seen, with the aggression that is, thoroughly documented in the report that I'm sure folks have seen all over social media. We've had instances, in the past 2 weeks alone outside of the Brooklyn Museum, next to Columbia University, where not only low-level cops, but the top brass of the operation, the commanding officers of these boroughs and of these jurisdictions, are actively brutalizing protesters. And we often see that we are actually the ones who end up keeping ourselves safe from the police, right? We are the ones that form walls to protect one another and hold each other tightly when they try to, strike people, jump at people, rip people away. They recently not only arrested, but literally grabbed a journalist who was just documenting another ongoing arrest outside of the Brooklyn Museum, threw him to the ground, dragged him across the street, and then proceeded to put their knees on his back and his legs before arresting him. This is a journalist. They've also started cracking down on protest monitors from the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild, whose job is literally to make sure that the NYPD is adhering to their own laws and protocols and ensuring that they are not violating our rights as protesters. And there's a lot more on this in the report, and I really encourage folks to check it out. But I really want to underscore that the logic of permits is one that frankly it hasn't ever been an issue for us. And this argument about permits is much more a precursor for the NYPD to crack down on our movement. And B, the NYPD is actively not interested in keeping us safe and is actively not interested in keeping people around safe. It's about controlling and policing and restricting what we are able to do, not only as protesters, not only as a movement, but as people living in New York City, as individuals who, are less allowed to live in this city and act as we want without being surveilled and without being, controlled and restricted.
Nerdeen, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just that, I think not just for our movement, but for most protests in New York, a protest with a permit is essentially a parade because, as the other WOL members said, there literally is no marching permit unless it's a parade. It needs to be done months in advance. It's very archaic. It needs to be done in person. You have to pay, money. So, we've never gotten a permit. Not just out of the impracticality and lack of logic that is connected to it, but also out of principle of not collaborating with the same forces that are training with people killing, our people in Gaza and also killing people here in the U.S. We've also been part of other protests and social movements, particularly the movement for Black liberation in the U.S. We've all been to and have been part of Black Lives Matter protests since 2013. And, at these protests, it's just unheard of that you would ever get a permit to protest the very entity that you're protesting against. So, we wouldn't undermine these other movements and these other groups by creating or falling into this dichotomy of good protester versus bad protester. And, getting permits and being orderly because, at the end of the day, even the groups that are getting permits are now getting cracked down on as well. And they'll use whatever it takes to try to silence us. And they contradict each other all the time, too. So at the protests where Dan and I were arrested, the captain who was in charge of that protest said, if you exceeded 300 to 400 people, it would be dangerous for you to be on the sidewalk. So you would be able to take half the street. And so we did. And we still got arrested for being in the street. And the assistant commissioner told us that, the one on scene had made a mistake and he shouldn't, have told us that. And, prior to us even getting processed and, taken to the precinct, right in front of me and all the other people who were on the, truck that was moving us from the protest to the precinct to get processed, the cop in charge said about Dan, he didn't do anything, uncuff him, we have no evidence. And they started arguing with each other and they took him anyway. So they're literally having these conversations in front of our faces. And there's a lot more that's been happening, behind the scenes, not just with the NYPD, but, other levels of government that have been repressive. And so, we're still discussing all of these things and putting it together to continue to put out these pieces of the report. But I'm sure not just us, a lot of people have been having experiences that are absolutely wild right now and just mark the kind of moment we're in.
Thank
Can
you.
I just want to, before we go to the report, I know Bassam wants to go through it, just like to highlight an obvious thing that you all have made clear, you and organizers across the country that have shut down bridges, streets, city halls, government, they have not been dangerous. I mean, the only danger that's emanated from them has been from police to the protesters who have been injured. But that you all have actually done a fabulous job of keeping one another safe and organized. And I think that that obvious piece needs to be said, especially in the face of increasing demonization. And so just this idea of also bringing back up what when the movement, Black uprisings were happening with a really pointed critique at police forces. We're back in this moment where we can highlight that once again. Abolition, like decolonization, is not a metaphor. It's a project. It's an experiment, and it stays focused. So just to highlight that you all have done very risky things and kept everyone safe.
Yeah. I know that we promised around an hour, and we just hit the hour, but I'd like to go through the report, which is very resourceful, and simply look at different aspects of it. And please feel free to let us know what is it that we are looking at. Of course, this is the cover. This is basically your statement. The URLs and the handles are all here. Of course, they will also be published on the same link that led people to this conversation on Jadaliya. So if you give us permission, we will place this report on there along with all the links, so people don't have to, take things down. Can you just go through the table of contents real quick, just to let people know what's in it? Anyone?
Dan, you want to go through this? Or the other one?
Sure.
Member?
So I mean, it's the introduction kind of speaks for itself. The surveillance and police harassment, that kind of goes into just all the different elements of police surveillance technology, relationships with the Zionist state that we've been able to identify, and it's by no means exhaustive. I'm sure there's a ton that we don't know, that we haven't been able to uncover, things that probably will only be able to be uncovered through FOIA or through litigation, through discovery. So definitely encourage people who are FOIL people, like who like to do FOIA. That's definitely an area that needs like a lot of different ideas. Same cop, same playbook. This refers to the demographics unit of the early 2000s, right after 9/11, which I don't know if people are familiar or not, but it was a unit that was set up literally by two CIA officers who were embedded with the NYPD, Larry Sanchez and Michael Cohen, I believe was his name. And they created this, they identified 28 ancestries of interest, which are basically Muslim ancestries, nationalities, and mapped out throughout New York City, masjids, community centers, bookstores, cafes, restaurants that people from these ancestries would go to, and they would just sit there. They would just surveil. They would collect information. They would pressure people into becoming confidential informants. It was a wide, we could talk about this deserves its own kind of podcast, I think, because there's so much history there. And there's so much stuff to talk about that in relation to this moment now. But basically it was a unconstitutional, racist, Islamophobic surveillance program that the NYPD launched against the Muslim community in New York City. And we did go into a little bit of the history in the report, which starts at page 11 on the table of contents, but I definitely encourage people to read through that. Defend Palestine, that is kind of going through, it's the biggest section. It goes through every instance of police violence at our actions. Probably not everyone, but ones that we are aware of, at least, ones that have been documented since October 7th. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of incidents of documentation. There's videos. I don't know if all the videos are on the PDF, but on the website, there's a lot of videos that are linked. that are kind of backing up what we have to say. We were very intentional about wanting citations for every single thing that we said, so that anytime that someone, wanted to dispute what we were saying or discredit us, because we are making big claims here, we had something to back it up. And we do have everything to back it up, because these are facts that are going on in the ground. We're not just making this kind of stuff up. It's not fiction. This is a report that we put a lot of time into based on our experiences. So I think we also had in the...
Can you quickly share, I'll also put it on screen, can you quickly share the URL?
Sure, it's WOL Palestine, WOL Palestine.com
Okay.
/resist repression. I think I could put it in this chat here.
WOL.com/resist repression.
I actually don't think I can put it.
No worries. WOL Palestine.
.com /resist repression. And I'll take you there.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
I believe the next section on it was a section on this map that we had published. And it was a map of targets that we wanted to expose. We're talking about banks like BNY Mellon, who invests millions of dollars into Elbit systems to massacre Palestinians. Places like the New York Times, the New York Post, who've manufactured consent for the genocide in Palestine. Things that are places that deserve to be protested, basically. Friends of the IDF, they have an office in New York City. Things like this. But the media took it as, the right-wing media, Zionist media, took it as, oh, you are creating a map of Jewish institutions.
Oh my God.
Right? To, basically the same story would happen to the mapping project in Boston, if y'all are familiar with that. These are all very well-sourced claims about these institutions that we put on the map. And for people to protest at, for people to write articles about, but yeah, there it is right there. But the media took it as, we're preparing for a pogrom or something like that, when this is all...
And they don't believe that. They don't believe that.
Of course.
No, that's just fear-mongering. Yeah.
And this map was actually led to our suspension on Instagram at least once. I don't know, maybe twice. But
and you're still suspended, right?
Well, now we're like permanently banned. Now we can't even appeal the decision. So it's not just a suspension, and this is what they're saying publicly. We're gonna do what it takes to fight it, but right now we're just focused more on continuing to mobilize our people, show that this is undeterred. Show that we're undeterred. We had multiple actions since we've been banned, and we've had amazing turnout. Still, we built bigger platforms. We've never really paid attention to X or Twitter before as much, and Telegram, but we're building those out now to bring more people out. But yeah, both of our Instagrams and DTP, who worked on Decolonize This Place, who worked on this map with us, were also suspended for this map. And I just think it's funny that, they accuse us of anti-Semitism, but then they go and say BlackRock is a Jewish institution, apparently. So, and we protested. Sorry.
What a way to protect the police state, right? To basically accuse anybody who protests against it, or like financiers and capitalists, that all of that now becomes bigotry. This is really, really dangerous as a precedent.
Does the IDF have an IG account?
Unfortunately, they probably post thirst traps on there. I think I'm banned by a lot of the Israeli government. I think I am banned by the IDF or blocked. Not that would matter now, since my Instagrams are also deleted, but I often wouldn't see those posts. And just a note on this map, even the writers of the New York Post article, who made it seem like we're planning like some sort of attack at these places, have actually written and have been at many protests where we've protested almost every single location on this list. And I believe, if not us, other groups have protested, things like Puma and other things on this list, to where every single target on this list has been protested. And this isn't the first iteration of the map. We've put one up in 2021, and it has never been an issue, was never deleted or suspended for it until now. A lot of posts, that we've made with like, collages or like graffiti of like Layla Khaled maybe that have been on my Instagram for years, photos of me with Rasmiya Oda that have been on my Instagram for years. Other things that WOL have posted have never been an issue up until the last 3 months, where so many things have just been flagged out of nowhere. Like they're combing through and looking for any reason to suspend us. And I know that this is the same experience with Decolonize, this place as well. And it's always like support for dangerous organizations or terrorist groups, which is, what also this was suspended for. So it's illogical. There is no backing to any of the claims that they make, but ultimately it's private property and we were, kicked off of it. And I think it's a cautionary tale to all groups, not to organize on private property, that we should be building, our own platforms, that our power is ultimately in the streets. We're not, an online organization. We're an organization based among the people, with the masses, the people who will still come out even harder now that they're trying to silence us.
One of the things about the law, since, there's 2 attorneys here, possibly a third budding attorney. But one of the things about the law is not just how repressive it is on its face, but the uneven way in which it's enforced. So the fact that, there might be a lot of violations of this, you all might be in violation, but the disproportionate, scrutiny of you, plus the fact that you are punished while others are let gone, is also a face of the law that's demonstrated through disparate treatment and disproportionate impact. And we're seeing it. We're seeing things like the lawsuit, the unearthing of an KKK legislation to basically prosecute 2 Black students at Northwestern University for inserting pamphlets into their student paper. I mean, the irony of that, right? That's obscene. Those charges were dropped, but I keep just emphasizing this moment of, this isn't just about Palestinians. We continue to be the canary in the coal mine. But this isn't just about Palestinians. I mean, if they can expand the state power and police force in the most obscene ways, who's safe? Who's safe? So really, thank you for continuing. How do you protest that? And if we can go to the end of your report, which is kind of how you're telling us, you don't surrender. It is through direct confrontation. And so the last section of the report, if you go up a little bit, there it is. Can you walk us through this piece, this critical piece?
Yeah, basically, and I think that this is really a spirit that we've seen, especially this past week. But the final section is called "The People United Will Never Be Defeated," and is, serves as a reminder and an affirmation of the fact that everything that they're trying to do, everything that the NYPD, that the, federal government, that, higher educational institutions, that private corporations are trying to do to stop us and to stifle our movement won't work. Because as long as we are standing together, shoulder to shoulder, we as a mass of people cannot be stopped as a movement, no matter how hard they try. The past week, as Nerdeen mentioned, even though our Instagram was taken down, we've had actions since that have been attended, actually, if anything, by more people, because organizations and individuals who stand with us, who support us, who are in solidarity with us, who work alongside us, have, in lieu of our presence on Instagram, posted these flyers on their own pages. Mm-hmm. And so instead of one account sharing these actions and these flyers, it's dozens. I think that this has also really angered people in a way that, against this repression, in a way that has made them a lot braver. The goal of the NYPD, the goal of every repressive force that we've been facing in this moment, has been to scare us off the streets, to scare us, away from speaking up, to scare students away from advocating for divestment resolutions, to scare, journalists from exposing what's going on. And it's not working. When we took Tunnel last week, it was the day after Israel began bombing Rafah. And there was so much energy, not only because people wanted to stand against the escalation of this genocide, but also because they see how it is directly impacting our lives here in the United States, and that these are not, these are not mutually exclusive things and are in fact deeply interconnected. And that's why we were able to, take over the street after many weeks of being pushed off, of being arrested, of being beat, of being targeted. People basically had enough. And the police, from my perspective, were terrified of the masses of people who were unwavering and unafraid. For almost the entirety of this protest in Midtown Manhattan, it was on February 13th. The police were playing the LRAD, which is like the big speaker that announces in this very, dystopian, like fascistic voice, like, you are on the roadway, you are going to be arrested, move to the sidewalk now.
Oh.
And they were playing that literally for maybe 2 hours, but they didn't actually arrest as many people as was expected, because they, frankly, I think, knew that they couldn't stop us. And we took back the roadway in Manhattan, something that had been a challenge for 3 weeks. We closed out outside of News Corp, the corporation that hosts Fox News, the New York Post, many other right-wing rags. And we're going to keep coming out, and we're going to keep coming out stronger and more united and more unshakable and more unafraid. Because, this isn't just a movement to fight what's happening right now. This is a movement for liberation, for Palestinian liberation, and for all our liberation from, we literally say from New York to Palestine. And it's from New York to Palestine, this is our movement.
I mean, from these occupied lands, especially, just to elevate that, I'm sure Lenape lands where you're at, Piscataway where we're at. Yes.
Does anyone here have any last words that I really would have loved to go to some questions, because the feed is pretty busy, and there are interesting things happening. But maybe we can sort of ask you to join again, hopefully under better circumstances. I keep saying this, it never happens. And maybe we can make it more of a conversation also with people who'd like to know more, whether they're in New York or elsewhere, because everyone is inspired infinitely by what you guys have been doing and what other groups like yourselves have been doing in certain parts of the country here in the United States. So, but before we leave with this sort of a promise that we will try to reach out to you to see if you have time to come back at any time in the future. Do you have any last words or last comment you'd like to make? And this also applies to Noura. You can all, everyone watching here, by the way, you can all find out more about what is going on with this project that we are embarking on at palestineandcontext.org. You can also find this video after it's published on palestineandcontext.org. And many other teach-ins. We have now 23 teach-ins. The next teach-in will happen next Thursday, and it's under the title Present Absent 48 Palestinians, which refers to the Palestinian citizens of Israel and their plight. We have a panel next Thursday that's very interesting at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so please join us then. And we will have all of the, of course, all of the teach-ins, not just on there, but also segmented in case you would like to see something particular. But I'll stop now and ask everyone to chime in if you'd like to say something before we close.
Yeah, we really appreciate y'all having us, and we're happy to come back anytime to continue to expose these abuses on our community and inspire one another and get inspired from y'all and all you have to share how to continue to resist this repression. And as Noura said, just as an advice to everyone, when they're attacking you like this, that means it's working. And the best way to resist it is not to stop, but to continue to fight back against it collectively. And that's what we're going to continue to do. And I don't think I mentioned this, earlier. I mentioned the campaign of, all of these people attacking one of our members, Abdullah, these Zionist organizations trying to get him suspended. The Harvard's email system where they were sending the emails in support of him actually ended up crashing because there were so many emails
Nice.
in support of him. And we're going to come out with the update soon that this didn't work. Their attempts to silence him, suspend him, didn't work. Just like I talk about a lot of my accomplishments at CUNY Law, but really what gave rise to that was all of the Zionist attacks that I was facing when I initially became a student. Essentially they did our work for us by kind of making us famous or making us known, making us popular. And then when people actually meet us and look at the work we're doing, they support Palestine. So, as difficult as these attacks are right now, as much as they want to shift the narrative and conversation away from us exposing this genocide to making it about resisting repression here, not only does it mean it's working, it's also an opportunity, for us to expose this even further and grow our movement. And that's just what I've seen consistently over the last 10 years. The more they try to silence us, the louder we'll be. And I just encourage everyone to embrace that and continue to move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say, in a closing note, we're talking about repression today, and we're not just talking about New York City, right? We're talking about Free the Merrimack 3 in New Hampshire. We're not just talking about like right here and now. We're talking about repression in Palestine. We cannot not mention the Holy Land 5, 3 of which were still locked up in federal prisons. And we're not just talking about Palestine, as Noura said, either. Free all the folks who are facing all those trumped up charges in Georgia and Atlanta for the Stop Cop City. They're getting RICO charges. Free everybody. Free Mumia Abu Jamal, who's experiencing some severe health issues right now due to his ongoing incarceration. So I would just end with that. Free all political prisoners from here to Palestine, from everywhere around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks y'all for having us.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Nerdeen. Our anonymous John Doe WOL member.
I would just say free them all and free Palestine.
Yeah. Thank you for your energy and for leading us. I know that there's protests across the country today. I imagine there's something going on in New York that you might be getting to. I know there's stuff in DC, and so yeah, stay safe, keep one another safe, and like you said, Nerdeen, there's no protection in us cowering. So stay strong.
Thank you all for joining us. I know that you have a lot of probably better things to do, especially today. So we'll release you, and we hope to see you soon again. And for those who are watching, and I saw some notes that some people just found out about this and joined, you can find this on Jadaliya's YouTube channel now, youtube.com/Jadaliya, or on Palestine in Context in the next couple of days. It will be there in full form and also segmented by speaker and topic. Thank you all very much. Thanks to Noura for joining us today. And thanks to Daniel C., Nerdeen Kiswani, and John Doe, the anonymous WOL member, and everyone at your organization, and all the supporters and all the people we see constantly. We didn't show any pictures today on purpose because we did not want to sensationalize. We wanted to have this conversation, but there are requests to see more of the action that you're doing, if only to learn about what you've been doing. And
report. Look at the report.
You can take a look at the report, of course, but also when we speak again, we probably will if it's all right with you, we can show more footage. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful time and be safe.